Good afternoon. Welcome to the Overview and Scrutiny Committee of the South Yorkshire Mayor Combined Authority this afternoon. Apologies for absence, please.
We have a few apologies today from Councillor Douglas Johnson, who has sent Councillor Gilligan Kubo in his absence, Councillor Jake Kearsley, Councillor Zahira Naz, Councillor Ken Wyatt, also apologies, and we're just waiting for Councillor Jane Kidd, who may show or might be apologies.
Thank you very much for that. I believe on item 2 on the agenda that we have no urgent items or announcements for consideration. Swiftly moving on to item 3, items to be considered in the absence of the public and press. There are none today. Okay. Item 4, declarations of interest by any members as to any items on the agenda today. I'll take silence as forever holding your peace. Okay. Reports from and questions by members. I'm not aware of any for this. I think they're holding their fire for later, potentially. Questions for members of the public? Any? There are none. And then we've got minutes of the previous meeting held on the 21st of September. Should we go through page by page on this?
This is for accuracy or not?
For accurate, well, either should we go through for accuracy first? I could do the entire for accuracy first. Should we do that first? Any matters pertaining to accuracy of the meeting? Okay, and I'll go through page by page as numbered in the agenda. So I'll start from page 5 for any matters arising from the meeting. So I'll say page 5, page 6.
Chair, just to say that on the action for the Director of Public Transport Operations, this has been done and I have received the information I asked for from Tim.
I'm on the call. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not. Hello.
I was saying you had done that.
I have indeed. Thank you, Councillor. Yes, no, I sent you that last month. If I don't hear anything back in a few weeks, I'll chase the council for the costs that I described to you as well.
Thank you for that. I'll move on to page 7. Any matters arising from that? Page 8.
Sorry, Chair. On the item in respect of timetable for development of the tram network, there's an agenda item today in respect of tram transfer that the Exec Director of Public Transport is joining later in the meeting. I suggest that you incorporate that question into her update. I've pre-briefed her. She'll cover off obviously time between now and the 22nd of March, but also then our plans in terms of making changes to the network post 22nd of March and indeed a tram vision strategy which is currently underway. So I suggest that action's closed following adequate completion of the agenda item later today.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. Page 8. Page 9. Page 10. Thank you very much. We'll move swiftly on to the next item of the agenda, which is we've already had your Tim. You've got anything else to raise on the from the action log for the action log?
No, Chair. Just the bus funding update has been deferred until early next year. I've given members a private briefing on the early findings of the customer survey work that was undertaken towards the end of this year as well. But that will be brought to a future meeting as planned now as part of the revised work plan.
Okay. Right. Because we're now on item 8. We'll go through the action log if anybody wants to raise anything from that. We've got the South Yorkshire Renewal Fund, some of the actions.
So we've got a few actions at the start on metrics and kind of reporting and strategies, which hopefully we can cover a bit in end of year committee report.
Okay, thank you for that. We've got the forward plan of key decisions from Pat, but I presume that will come forward later with the on the tram.
I can cover that now. I can cover that now, Chair, briefly if you want to. This was information
Yes,
about
please.
Woodburn Road Tunnel. We're continuing to do monitoring. FCC are doing routine inspections. The last one was taken just over a year ago. No visible change. Further request for a secondary follow-up inspection has been given, but we're just waiting for SCC and Amy to action that. We've not yet appointed the contractor to do the infill work. We're expecting to make the decision on that in March 2024. Clearly, we'll need to do that, mindful of decisions and discussions which generated this action around the potential use of that tunnel for railway scheme expansions, including restoring your railway. So it is still a matter that I would suggest remains open for now, but that's the latest update, Chair. Thank you.
I mean, you're talking about the end of the year, next year, which I presume is that's December 24.
So the decision will be taken. Sorry, financial year, March 2024.
So that's the financial year. Just so okay.
Yes.
Are we talking with this? Is there any hold up from Sheffield City Council providing? Because it was 3 months ago. Was it 3 months ago our last meeting? I mean,
it was around that. I'll take a further action to chase them on the survey work, Chair, and make sure we get a committed date from them on when that will be undertaken.
Thank you for that. So we'll move on to the bus franchising assessment. Are we going to cover this? No, we're not covering that later. When are we likely to have some dates from the outcome of the assessment for the bus franchising? Because we were talking about it at the last scrutiny meeting, and has it moved forward any more? Because obviously we talk about bus franchising is we need to know if it comes from that in terms of, because options when are we lucky to narrow?
Give you my view. Give you latest. She should be. If
That's sounds with that. We'll move. Any funding? Because did I let from the?
If that helps. Funding, so there's 6-point funding award for this finance next consequence of a different has been allocated for the financial year 24 assessment on as we can. Expansion of buses, and we were having then no confirmation of them in terms of clearly more than for next year. But that money has been committed. We've 25.
Move on. On to page. No. Through the pages, so anyone wants to raise. Page 18. Raise on that, which is the Visitor Economy Partnership, City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. And then we'll move on to page 19. Anybody wish to have anything to raise there on some of the schemes on the Shared Prosperity Fund, which I see there's and the Rural Shared Prosperity funding that's come through. Did I?
Oh,
Did,
yeah.
Did some money come? Did I see some more money on the forward plans? Have some money come through that may be applicable to Sheffield? Did I see?
I'm not sure about that. So there was an action the committee raised why Sheffield City Council haven't been allocated a rural shared prosperity fund. Yeah, so I think that's been in either this action log or a previous one. Yeah, so page 21 in the pack, there was a question about rural shared prosperity fund, and we got an answer that the methodology used by the government giving the grant was such that Sheffield wasn't given an allocation, and that was something that the MCA wasn't able to change. Page 21, very end of page 21, and goes into. Oh, sorry, 12. It's because I'm looking at it upside down. Page 12 and page 13 runs from page 12 onto the top of page 13. Yeah. So that was when the committee raised it and the question we asked to officers and the answer we were given.
The only thing is, I think I saw a document come into our shared folder which alluded to some funding, and I clicked on the link because I was in Sheffield Town Hall and it didn't go through to anything, so that may have been indicative.
Well, we didn't get anything.
Right, so we move on. That was page, going back now, 2021, the transport levy. To consider a 2% increase to the public transport levy. Can you give us a quick explanation for members of the public who may watch now or in the future? What this would entail?
I don't know if Tim is able to advise on transport levy, just an explanation of what it is and.
Yeah, no, so very briefly, the transport funding that used to previously be paid to the Passenger Transport Executive, that transport levy is made up of effectively an allocation from each of the 4 local authorities based on population percentage split across the 4 local authorities, constituent members. That funds the bulk of, with some levy reduction reserve, the bulk of what was PT transport and continues to be the MCA transport revenue budget going forward. In prior years, that's faced numerous cuts. In fact, we had around about a decade of that budget being reduced, and it was then flatlined. And in last year and this year, and indeed into next year, it has now been approved for a year-on-year increase. So that amount has been approved and agreed by the Directors of Finance of each of the 4 local authorities, and that's being proposed for the 2024-25 budget also.
So to get that clear, how is that? So how the approval is by the finance directors at each relevant authority, and they've all given that
ultimately
approval.
They've given that approval through negotiations. The actual final approval takes place as part of the MCA budget approval in Q4, i.e. next year.
Okay, thank you for that. Moving on to page 22. Safe Place to Sleep programme. Any questions on this?
Yeah, we'd like more information.
Yeah, I think it would be interesting to know what this actually is, because for me, Safe Place to Sleep could cover anything from SIDS and infant death to homelessness, abuse. So I'd very much like to know what that project is actually about.
Do you have any information, Tim, for this one?
I'm afraid that's not a policy area that I covered, Chair. Claire's just joined the call. I don't know if she's able to give us a brief update on this particular decision. Claire?
Yeah, sorry. Apologies. I couldn't see who was in the room. I didn't know whether Andy was around the table. So this programme comes on the back of a partnership that we've been doing with Harvard Bloomberg. Excuse me. So 8 people from South Yorkshire, so people from the Combined Authority, people from the local authorities. We've had colleagues from health and from the voluntary community sector. I've been working with Harvard Bloomberg to look at a wicked health problem, frankly. And the programme that the partnership has come up with is, as it says in the report, Safe Spaces to Sleep. And what the proposed programme is focusing on is the number of children across South Yorkshire who haven't got access to a bed. So there's a charity based in Sheffield that operates across the county called Baby Basics, and they provide beds, mattresses, cots, Moses baskets, and other basic equipment for those suffering from poverty, disadvantage in this space, who haven't got that access to the equipment that they need to keep their baby safe. And we are exploring an initiative to put in place 4 pilots, one in each local authority area. The pilot areas have been identified in partnership with each of the local authorities to look at things like data, provision of equipment. So as I say, it's pilot programmes that will hopefully, if successful, be rolled out across South Yorkshire.
Thank you for that, Hannah.
Yeah, so just to absolutely clarify, it's specifically about tackling infant death, I presume. No, so families who don't have because you mentioned cots, Moses baskets. So I presume this is a consequence of poverty, overcrowded houses, kids that don't have separate bedrooms, but obviously having a safe place to sleep per se is an infant death campaign. Is that specifically what it is?
It's not just about infant death, no. It's about the first 1,000 days of life and the impact that we know that not having that right start in life has on your health outcomes throughout your life. So we know that children that don't get the inputs that have been identified as best practice, and one of those is clearly around getting a good night's sleep. So we know that the evidence tells us that children that are going into school that haven't slept properly, but even younger children, as their brain is still forming, synapses are being joined, where children are not having a restful night's sleep, it has a massively detrimental impact on their development, and we know that then follows them through the rest of their life. So this is, yeah, for sure, about that kind of really hard crisis end of that, but also around the wider impact that not having adequate or appropriate places to sleep has on children and young people. We know that there are examples of children in South Yorkshire sleeping in baths, in drawers, just completely not what any of us would want for children and young people. So this programme is about addressing that gap really, and providing support and equipment to families that are in need.
Jeanette.
I was just going to say, obviously in the olden days, putting a baby in a drawer was considered a very sound thing to do. If you go onto what used to be called Twitter and Baby Basics, the actual campaign is on there, and they're just saying that yesterday, for instance, they had 400 cot beds and mattresses donated to them, and it's all part of a campaign against bed poverty. And I think Baby Basics did start in Sheffield, and there is now a branch of it in lots and lots of towns around the country. And it's a charity that also, you know, it's what it says on the tin. It's all the basics you need when you have a baby and you can't afford a pram, a cot, etc. And it's a 0 to 5 campaign. It's actually really good.
Thank you for that, Shannon. Does it cover, one of the things I was going to ask, because obviously one of the things about babies born into quite extreme poverty, where does it cover, because quite often these are in short-term rents, does it cover moving equipment, etc., between places of residence? Do they just get provided initially with sleeping, not just sleeping materials, but all the other things that will help them in the early years of life? But does it help if they're frequent movers, and how does that get tracked? Is there have you got any information about how that would work?
I've not to hand. I know that the charity, as Sinead said, well established, both in South Yorkshire and across the country. So I'm sure that the circumstance that you've described is something that isn't novel or unique to people here, and it will be something that they have dealt with. But I don't know specifically if they would offer that service as part of this programme. But I'm sure that with the wraparound that the charity provides and the way that they receive referrals, so they receive referrals in from local authorities, from schools, from doctors, from other voluntary and community sector organisations. So although I can't say kind of cast iron guarantee, I would be very surprised if that wraparound service isn't provided.
I was just going to suggest, and I don't know if we're allowed to do it. I'm going to say it anyway, that I know that it's Finland, isn't it? And then now in Scotland, they provide a sort of a cardboard box of completely everything you need for the first 6 months, I think, of your baby's life, including the box to be a sleeping box. So if the Lord Mayor is, no, he's not the Lord Mayor, he's the area mayor, so the regional mayor would like to actually have a look at that as a way of supporting poorer families, then I think it would be really good if he might take that on board and just look at what's happened in Scotland, and I'm sure a trip to Finland would be on the cards. Except obviously Hannah, no, I'll have to go because you don't like travelling, do you, Hannah?
Hannah?
Yeah, I was just literally going to mention exactly what Shauna did there. It's something that the Scottish Government has introduced. Not everything they've done has been great, but that one, it's very evidence-based, I believe, in public health, and has been very successful in other countries as well. It's not obligatory to have your baby sleep in a cardboard box, but it removes that stigma of having to go home from hospital without having anywhere for your baby to sleep. And I think it's fundamentally designed to tackle the problem of unplanned co-sleeping as well. But yeah, exactly, a universal benefit that I think is something potentially very helpful and gets over that first hurdle at least.
Yeah, thanks for that. I agree. We have looked at those programs, and there are other similar ones around the world, and that's where there's one of the benefits of working with Bloomberg and Harvard, because they can bring that great wealth of evidence and data. But we've also been working with directors of public health on the development of this scheme alongside the directors of children's services. And we are building into the programme that's being proposed a significant evaluation element to make sure that what we do, all the learning can be captured to we hope make the most, kind of take the most opportunity of being able to get this mainstream going forward.
I'm really sorry. One final thing, sorry. When I was on the fire authority, we also gave a grant to Barnsley Hospital for they were like thermo cards, which meant that you could put them in your cot and regulate your child's temperature, monitor it, and that was another thing that was a safety thing, which if that is still going, you might want to add to the sort of the COT campaign, because it was about keeping babies safe once they were home.
Great, thank you. I've not heard of that, but I'll pass it on to the team to follow up. Thank you.
Sorry, Claire. If I could just come in just with one last thing, actually. I just in terms of the project, I hope that people involved in the project are keeping in mind the sort of current lullaby trust advice around co-sleeping, because we know that telling parents it's very unsafe to have a baby in bed with you, here's a box, bed, cot, Moses basket, whatever to put them in, doesn't always necessarily help. And actually, most of the infant death charities now give advice on safe, planned co-sleeping. So rather than just telling people don't do this thing, because that doesn't help. So I do hope that advice on safe co-sleeping is going hand in hand with this project, because it's one thing wanting babies and small children to sleep in their own bed, but it doesn't always happen even when they have one.
Of course, and that's not always something that people can control, so I'll certainly just pass that feedback on to the team. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. No more questions on that. We'll move on to the rest of page 23. Any questions? And that's that. Now, next thing is the committee work plan, and we've got the two. So we've got today's, which I don't intend to cover because we've got everything on the work plan we wish to have. And then on the next page, if you turn around to page 28, we're talking about the future work plan. And anybody got questions before Hannah?
I know you've already raised it, Claire, as a question that we're going to raise later in the meeting when Pat's on the call, but I do think we do need regular updates on the bus franchising project, because I think that's a big one, and obviously it's another 3 months until March, and I would like to hope that there will be some sort of update on that by that time. So I think I would like to see that on the agenda there, please.
That's been noted, Sinead.
Well, going back to the previous topic, could we have a further report on the success or otherwise of the Safe Places to Sleep programme, please?
I think that is entirely appropriate. I think we need to, because we need to make sure that that we keep monitoring and to see, and we'll hope that it'll be a success, but whether there are any funding shortfalls, etc., and whether and to make sure that we can contribute towards making sure that it is a success in the future. The other thing I'd like on a future work programme, my understanding is, I don't know whether there's anybody here, is that there is an emerging nature recovery plan for South Yorkshire being developed. Can we have that on a future work programme?
Yep, that's no problem.
Have we got any timescales of where that's at, etc.?
So we're just, sorry, excuse me, we're just in the process at the moment of appointing members to the advisory board for the development of the strategy. So we are hoping that we'll have people appointed into that board by February. And then we will start in earnest. There are already a number of working groups looking at the content for the plan, so we could bring something probably in March.
Yeah, that sounds fine, just because obviously we want to be ahead of the game as it's being developed, to have any input rather than behind.
Yes.
Thank you. Swiftly moving on to the next item of the agenda. Claire, I see you're for this one as well, and Mark on the Police and Crime Commissioner Powers update.
Yep, great. Thank you, Chair. So, as you say, my colleague Mark Cooper is in the room. Mark has been appointed as the Programme Director for the integration of PCC functions, liabilities, powers into the Mayoral Combined Authority and across to the Mayor directly from May next year. We've just got a short presentation for members we won't labour that to give you time for questions. So I'll just hand over to Mark, if that's okay.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chair. I'll just talk through some of the highlights and then, as Claire says, open it up for any questions. So, as members may know, in May of next year, all Police and Crime Commissioner functions will transfer to the South Yorkshire Mayor, and all PCC assets, rights and liabilities will transfer to the MCA. Staff currently working in the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner will then become employees of the MCA, and the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner will be abolished. The transfer of functions, responsibilities, staffing, etc. will take place after the election of a new mayor on the 2nd of May of next year, who will then take on the function of the Police and Crime Commissioner. And to give legal effect to these changes, the Home Office and the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities will lay a statutory instrument, which we call the Transfer Order, in Parliament. That's expected to be laid on Monday next week and come into force February, March of next year, which will then be in time for PERDA and then for the election, obviously subject to the parliamentary timetable. The MCA, as the receiving organisation, has overall responsibility for the programme. However, all parties recognise that it won't be possible to ensure a smooth and effective transfer of functions without the full support and cooperation of the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and, where appropriate, South Yorkshire Police. The programme's designed in two overlapping phases. Phase 1 focuses on identifying and managing all aspects related to the legal transfer of functions, assets, rights and liabilities between now and the May 2024 election. And then phase 2 will focus on the integration of all OPCC business, which includes the Violence Reduction Unit, into the MCA after the May 2024 election. Where agreed, work has commenced on phase 2 activities already, if that's required for successful integration. So an example would be that yesterday we held a staff event with the OPCC to talk about the TUPE process and put things in place for that. Just to talk through some key dates. So yesterday, as I say, we had the staff meet and greet event with the OPCC staff to talk through the whole process and what they can expect. Next Monday, the transfer order is expected to be laid in Parliament. Towards the end of January of next year, the TUPE staff consultation process will formally start. And then two other dates, obviously the 2nd of May is the date of the election, and then the 7th of May is when the transfer formally takes place.
Thank you for that. Have you got any questions from Sinead?
Thank you. Usually there would have been an election for a PCC, and they would then be in post immediately after the count. How long will it take for an appointment to be made to have the appropriate, I was going to say police officer, but that's the wrong word, police and crime deputy mayor, or whatever we're going to call it, and will they be able to have a political role like the current PCC, or will they be politically restricted?
Okay, so the decision as to whether appoint a deputy mayor will be for the mayor to take. It's not a mandatory role. It's a role. It's something that whoever is elected as mayor will make a decision on. The process to appoint a deputy mayor is the same as the process to appoint a deputy police and crime commissioner. So it's subject to confirmation by the police and crime panel. So if the mayor, following the election, were to nominate someone, we would need then a police and crime panel to be organised and to be held. And I think that there is set out in statute a process for that, which allows the panel, I think something like 7 days following the date of the meeting, to make any recommendations to the mayor about the proposed appointment. So it wouldn't be instant, but it's also not guaranteed that a deputy mayor would be appointed. That would be a decision for the mayor. The role isn't politically restricted where it is appointed to.
And the police and crime panel, it's an advisory role they have. So if they said we don't like this candidate, the mayor doesn't actually have to take any notice of that.
They don't only have an advisory function, they do have some veto powers, but you're testing me now, Sinead, on whether or not they can veto the deputy appointment. We would have to check that out and come back to members, unless Mark knows.
My understanding is they can't veto the deputy mayor. Their veto is in relation to budgets that are set.
Do we have any more questions on this regarding it? I think Sinead's covered some of the stuff I was going to ask about in terms of the appointment process and potential and the ability, and whether the mayor takes it on as their own role, or whether they take it, or whether they appoint somebody who will be looking after it as part of it. In terms of the transfer, do we envisage? Are we going to get a programme of any potential savings in terms of back office, etc., as part of the process, and will that be known by the election in May, or is this something that will be considered post the appointment of the transfer of powers?
Yeah, so there's certainly nothing underway as we stand. As Mark has said, the staff in the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner will TUPE transfer across, and obviously the work that they're doing is really valuable and important and will need to be continued post the election. South Yorkshire Police are at the moment going through a priority-based budgeting process to try to identify, I think, what may be significant savings for them going forward over the medium term, and obviously, not obviously, but as we move forward, as this function comes into the Mayoral Combined Authority, there will be reporting on those things, but it will still sit through to the Police and Crime Panel as a separate scrutiny board body for policing and crime.
Sinead?
Sorry, I think I asked this before. The people who are TUPEing over, are they then going to be in this building along with everybody else of the mayoral entourage? Wrong word. Or will they continue to be over in police headquarters where they are snugly based at the moment?
As you'll understand, that's all subject to the consultation process that surrounds the TUPE transfer of their employment rights. We've not started that formal consultation yet because we've not got the order laid in Parliament. As Mark said, we had the team over in Broad Street West yesterday to meet with colleagues, but there's no decision taken yet on the final location of the team.
So there's a potential that everybody could move in here to there as well.
No.
No. Oh, no, yeah.
I don't think the Chief Constable would be best pleased with that proposal.
Can I just, there's clarity, is that the budget for the police is ring fenced, but the sharing of staff is not. Is that clarity? Back office staff particularly. Is that the case?
So the police fund is ring fenced in legislation. So the Home Office, as they passport the money and the powers through to the Combined Authority, place a ring fence around the police fund. That goes through, as it stands now, to the Police and Crime Commissioner, and a grant is given across to South Yorkshire Police and to other people like the victim services providers across South Yorkshire. That will remain, although now, rather than going across to the PCC, that police fund will come into the Combined Authority. Funding will then be provided to the Chief Constable and others. There's nothing to prevent a kind of shared service on any back office support, but that's no different in the new model than it is in this current model. And South Yorkshire Police have a number of shared services with other forces, and I think maybe with some local authorities.
Thank you for that. Any further questions? I'll say thank you very much for that update on the Police and Crime Commissioner powers. Thank you very much for that. And can we move on to the update on skills and community? Oh.
Sorry, can we just ask that we do have regular updates on this as we?
Yes, of course, no
problem.
problem.
Get closer.
Yep, great. Thank you very much.
Right, next we've got item 12 on the agenda, Fliss Miller, for on update on skills and community education. Proceed.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. So firstly, I will introduce myself, as I'm not sure you will have seen me before. So I am the new Director of Skills here at the Combined Authority, and I've been in post since October. I believe this item is on the agenda as a result of a conversation at the last meeting that you had, and so therefore I hope that the paper is framed in a way that is useful for you to give you an overview of the current provision that we have within the Combined Authority. I'm not going to go into any of the detail, but we'll take questions on what is set out there for you. I think it's fair to say we are on a journey with the skills provision, and we have had the devolved funding, which is the majority of our skills provision, and we've had 2 full years. We are very much now looking at, rather than just spend and enrolments, looking at outputs and outcomes, and so therefore we are starting to look more around where the spend is, and to make sure that we are strategically commissioning our funds to make sure we are directing spend where there is most need. I'm very passionate about skills. I see skills as an enabler. We have a low wage, low productivity challenge across the whole of the area, and it is how do we make sure that we use the funds we have to not only improve the quality of life for our residents, but also look at the wider economic challenge we have too. The programmes here are laid out for you, and I'm willing to take any questions.
Christine first. Thank you.
Thank you. I know this doesn't go into great detail about what, but I'm just looking at, do you make any stipulation about industries for the future, you know, in the renewables sector and things like that, or do you just provide it to the providers and it's for them to decide?
So it's a mixture of both, and so therefore the adult education budget is primarily looking at lower level skill base as well, rather than the higher level skills, but we will negotiate delivery plans with all of our grant providers, and then when we go out we also procure some of our provision, so there's contracted provision. When we go out to procurement, we are looking for some specific sectors and skills requirements going forward.
Sinead, you had.
This is all about skills. I understand that there's also community education as well. Is that something that you are responsible for? Because I note that this is all very for people who already want to learn, and what do we do for people who we want to sneak them into learning via other measures? If I give an example of the Dove Women's Workshop in South Wales, which started because women decided they all wanted to learn machine knitting, and then from that they grew this business where they needed to learn accountancy, and they kept learning, and as they got more confidence they ended up actually having university courses in their centre. It was called the University of the Valleys. And so what do we do in order to entice people into wanting to upskill in things via softer courses, if you like?
So as part of the adult education budget, which is our largest budget, a significant proportion of that budget is spent on community learning, and so that is it's within that bigger budget there. So we have regulated and non-regulated learning. The non-regulated learning is what we call community learning, and so that is where we are going out to communities, looking at confidence building, a range of different things. So that is where people are furthest away from accessing, I guess, regulated standard qualifications. So that's part of that budget there.
So, and do you actually commission other people to do that? Or, you know, how is it done? I know universities used to do stuff at the same time, get local authority, I don't know, cake decorating and things, which were those lowest, which move you forward. So what sort of stuff are you providing? I don't want to do cake decorating, it's okay.
So we commission all of our local authority partners to undertake community learning, and then they also will subcontract, commission community groups, a number of different providers to meet our residents where they're most at need. So therefore we do commission all of the local authority partners, and they therefore will distribute the community learning funds as well in the most appropriate way for place.
Hannah?
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Fliss. Just looking at the devolved budget that we've got there, so the revenue budget of 55 million, we know that in comparison to other combined authorities, South Yorkshire is well behind in terms of its transport budget. So in terms of its skill budget, how does that budget of 55 million compare to other comparable combined authorities?
So I joined from Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, where our budget was £12 million a year. So coming here, it feels a lot bigger. But if we look by so work that I'd actually when I was in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, by per resident, South Yorkshire is, I guess, mid-table in terms of per funding per resident, where I think Tees Valley has the highest rate. So in terms of spend, we have, I guess, we're not as big as West Mids or GM, not surprisingly, but in terms of volume, we're probably midway, and then also in terms of spend per resident, we're probably just lagging behind midpoint.
Yeah, thank you. That's exactly what I was asking, actually. So that's really helpful. And in terms of accessing that budget, so obviously the adult education budget is devolved, that's 40 million. Is that sort of the main bit where we're mid-table, or is it that additional 15 million on top of that? And if I could just have a little bit of insight as well into where the rest of that 55 million comes from. I've seen that some of it's Shared Prosperity Fund, and but yeah, if I could just have a little bit of clarity on that as well, please.
Sorry, and a good point of clarification. So that's around the devolved budget, so that's where we're midpoint. As with everything else, a number of those are bid for, so some are delegated funds, and then some are things that we're bidding for, and then we also use gain share as well for some of the skills programs, and that really is dependent on area. For skills boot camps, it's something that we're quite new here in delivering, but we have put a bid in for a lot bigger proportion of funds to deliver in the next financial year. So there are some things that we can grow, and there are some things where through different partnerships we can also look at trying to increase funding into the area.
Thank you for that. I see no more questions, so I'll ask a couple. You talk about since devolution, you say the underspend has been declining year on year. Will this mean that you're going to have issues in future years? Because I presume that the underspend would eventually become an overspend because of budgetary pressures, inflation, etc. Would this be the case?
So the devolved budget is a flatline budget, and so therefore we are getting less for our money. However, in the first year we had a 20% underspend. This year we're looking about an 8% underspend. What I really want us to do and where we're heading as a team is to make sure that we're making our money go further, and so therefore be a lot more efficient in what we're doing, make sure that we use our partners, making sure there isn't duplication of provision, and just trying to get the system to work better together so that we're spending our money more strategically, to making sure that we're spending money where there's most need.
Okay, there's another thing I'd like to ask. You talk about challenging opportunities, about the funding allocation only coming through very late for the 23-24 financial year. Does this mean, would this potentially mean that you got less value for money for the amount you spend because you only knew what you had to spend at the very late on, or had you budgets allocated that you're ready to spend on the programmes to do. I presume that you talk about with is it with literacy, etc., or is it predominantly other things?
So I think the point that you're raising is around Multiply, and that was a 3-year funding programme. That was before I joined the Combined Authority, but due to the late announcements, it meant that the first year of delivery was significantly underspent. But that was a 1-year problem. We're now in the 2nd year of delivery, and performance has certainly improved quite significantly. But for that first year of delivery, it meant that the funds wasn't spent within that year.
Does this also mean that in future 3 years down the line, that you're unsure about what allocation you would get, obviously, and these programmes, are they designed to be of a longer time span than you're actually, because you've got a 3-year programme, but the programmes you're putting in place, are they designed for a longer period? And so would you be looking at an earlier announcement of any allocations in future from the DFE potentially?
This is a significant challenge with all skills programmes. We often talk about, if you talk about the health budget, you talk about so many £1 million. If you talk about a school budget, you talk about per pupil. If you talk about skills programmes, it's by skills programme, and they're always short term, and it means you have to mobilise them very quickly, and then they finish. And so that's separate. Our devolved funds is what we have total devolved powers over. We can do what we want with that, and that's the biggest proportion of money. When the government announce new skills programmes, we have to mobilise really quickly, and there is often challenges with delivery within that first year because we have to contract, mobilise, and it's the same across the whole country. And so therefore it's something that we continue to speak with our civil servants about, but it's a challenge that we face, and it's the same for every combined authority, but it does provide us significant challenges for every new programme.
The extra costs potentially, because obviously if you're not sure, you're going to then suppliers or providers of the services will naturally build in the fact that they maybe not be able to provide that service in future, and that will be factored into extra costs. My guess is, would that be the case?
I think in part, yes. However, providers are having to get used to short-term funding because that is the nature of skills provision. It's the UK SPF, the Multiply, that's a 3-year contract. Skills boot camps at the moment are 12-month contracts, and so therefore providers are having to learn to adjust, but we always have that timeline for where we need to commission.
And do you, because looking at what you do, but just moving further on through the report where you talk about looking ahead, do you have plans of things that you would apply for funding so that in future you've got them on the shelf if the government announces extra pockets of money that can be adapted for those pockets of money that may become available? Do you do forward planning of that sort?
That is very much my intention, not attention. And as part of the skills strategy, we will be looking at having a pipeline of things that we want to take forward. So if there are funding calls, funding opportunities, then we will be ready to put those bids in. That's exactly where we need to be.
Very much, Christine.
Yeah, thank you. It's just one question under your challenges and opportunities. You talk about the risk of duplication through DFE directly contracting local providers. So do you work with local providers, things like the Prince's Trust, and because they do provide opportunities for employment and things? So do you have good relationships and you work with them?
I believe we do. I did in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It's something that I can't categorically say today around the Prince's Trust, but it's certainly an organisation that I've worked with a lot in the past and will endeavour to do so going forward. The biggest challenge on national versus local Commission is in the boot camp space, where there is a national procurement, and then we have regional procurement as well. So there are some challenges with certain skills programs that we have, but yeah, in the light of the providers you're talking about, such as the Prince's Trust, if we don't, we need to, but I'll come back to confirm where we are in our relationship with them.
Any further questions? Thank you very much for the report, and hopefully you'll come back to us in future, that we will be able to see what programs are forward and see what funding becomes available, and what activities that you're planning to look at funding it or developing. Thank you very much. Welcome. Next item of the agenda is active travel. Ed, see you down the far end. My eyesight's not as good as it used to be. Thank you very much. Would you like to give us an update on your plans? And is that Nicola next to you? Hello, Nicola. Sorry. For the next few minutes.
Hey everyone, my name's Ed. I'm the Active Travel Commissioner. As you might know, I've been in this role since February. Prior to that, I spent 20 years in elite sport. Prior to that, I was born and raised in Barnsley, South Yorkshire. Sat alongside me is the wonderful Nicola Marshall, our newly appointed Programmes Director.
Thanks. Thanks very much for having us, and I just joined in August.
So, I know we're up against the clock a little bit, so I'll briefly go through the agenda. So, we're going to do this in two halves. I'm going to go through the first half, Nicola's going to go through the second half. I want to talk about cycling wheeling, which basically means the use of wheelchairs, buggies, scooting, skating, cycling. I want to talk about why it matters, specifically here in South Yorkshire, what helps and what stops people, a bit of an overview of how we're doing at the moment across South Yorkshire, and I'll hand it over to Nicola. She's going to give us a bit of an update about a strategic plan that's going to also give us an update on where we're at. The problem, talking about making Road Safety Week last month, we saw in coronavirus the dip in car and van usage. We've now seen that increase back to pre-corona levels, and we've seen kills and serious injuries go up 22% in the last year, a direct correlation with the increase in traffic again. I'm talking about transport inequality, transport poverty if you like. There's postcodes in South Yorkshire where 70% of people they don't have access to a car, let alone own one. So active travel almost becomes more about fairness, helping the communities, families that need our help the most. And last thing on active travel, and one of its many positive benefits, it simply creates nicer places. You know, in a previous life I had a job that took me to all four corners of the world, and it was clear to see it creates nice places. People of South Yorkshire are proud where they come from, where they live. You know, desirable, attractive walking and cycling infrastructure, sustainable drainage units. We can see an increase in footfall. So they're the benefits. So, in terms of, I want to show you some things on this slide, because the success of active travel in South Yorkshire is going to be underpinned by behaviour change principles. So there's a couple on this board here. Now if we look on the left hand side, we know that educating, informing people, consultation is okay, but it's not nearly as good as co-designing, co-producing people. So we've already set about a piece of work with Sheffield Hallam. We've commissioned them to make quite a large behavioural insight piece, so we can go and meet the communities, see where they're at, see how they perceive the problems, rather than just prescribing active travel as the silver bullet, if that makes sense. So if we look on the right hand side, we can see a commonly used behaviour change model there. The whole premise is people have to be capable, people have to have the opportunity, people have to be motivated before behaviour and mode shift can take place. So if we look at that behaviour change model through the eyes of walking, for example, We might have a bit of a green light if people are capable. Very, very broadly speaking, more people are capable of walking. Might fall down a little bit in South Yorkshire on the opportunity if there's not enough crossing places, big, wide, dangerous junctions and so on. But really, there's enough people that have the capability that we can focus on motivating them. It's a little bit different if we look at that same model through the eyes of cycling. So cycling, to be capable, we have to have a bike, we have to have cycling equipment. We've probably got an amber light there to start with. We've probably got a bit more of a red light on the opportunity front. People aren't going to send their kids to school on the bike unless we've got separated, safe infrastructure. So there's no point in trying to motivate people to cycle just yet. So just a very quick overview of my thoughts and what I've seen since I've arrived. There's some pockets of excellent practice across the region. There really is. There's an increasingly integrated approach to transport, public health, sport, physical activity, which leads nicely onto delivery. Funnily enough, the places that are getting delivery done in a timely fashion are the ones that integrate public health, sport, physical activity and transport along the pipeline of desired infrastructure. The good news is we're building great relationships with Active Travel England, who are the executive agency for active travel in the UK. Bikeability, we've got the Living Streets conference here next year, so we're making good progress with the national stakeholders. Things to improve. We're working on a strategic plan to try and help create the step change, which I believe we need. We've talked about the need to engage the community when we're designing and collaborating. We need to support councillors, the public. We need to get a big dream, a big vision together that we can help sell. We spoke a little bit about the Road Safety Partnership, but going back one, to supporting authorities to deliver on time. So we've recently appointed Anna Butler, an infrastructure expert from Greater Manchester, who's going to help work with the local authorities on that. And of course, more stable long-term funding is always going to be helpful. I meet some really passionate people out there that are working hard to do something that's in alignment with their values. That's everything from me, apart from one more slide, Yeah, so just in summary, like I said, there's pockets of brilliance. We need to synergize a little bit, bring this together, create workshops of best practice. We need an exciting vision that we can sell to inspire the public, to inspire the teams, to inspire the politicians. And finally, this is a nice segue into Nicola. We need a new strategic plan.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. And so we'll be working over the next 6 to 9 months to put in place that new strategic plan. That will form part of the local transport plan that we're working with transport colleagues on, and this will be one of the sort of key implementation plans under the new local transport plan. We'll set at the top there some kind of clearer objectives around exactly which type of journeys that we're focusing on. We know we were going to focus predominantly on regular journeys people make, short journeys, but also journeys that integrate into public transport, because almost all public transport journeys start with a walking journey. We've got sort of 3 key objectives underneath. So Ed's talked already about we really need high quality infrastructure right across South Yorkshire. We know that's the biggest reason people don't walk, wheel and cycle, because they don't feel safe and they don't feel safe on the roads and streets. So we need to change those roads and streets to be safer for them with great infrastructure. But we also need to support campaigns which support people to particularly drive more safely, but also for environments to feel safe, particularly for women and girls in the middle there. And on the right hand side is direct projects which change behaviour. So whether that's cycle confidence training, working directly with schools and employers, but a set of activities which support people to use that great infrastructure and to feel safe doing it. And then underneath, supported by a set of strong foundations, I'll say a little bit more about the shared plan in a second. As Ed said, we're working with Sheffield Hallam now. We've commissioned an initial piece of insight. We now want to commission a bigger piece of insight into exactly working with communities to what would support them to travel differently, underpinned by the behaviour change principles Ed talked through. Ed's talked about that one team approach. We need significant funding, and the majority of that funding is likely to come from the bigger funding pots, for example, the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement in future years. And then we really need to work just to ensure we've got that broad public support for what we're trying to achieve. I won't talk through this in detail, but it's a significant programme of work over the next 6 to 9 months, we think. In particular, we're working to engage different communities and particularly those that are seldom heard. So we've just had a conversation with a potential partner around that, and I would like to work with partners that particularly support and engage ethnically diverse communities, women and girls, those with disabilities, long-term health conditions. Both they can help design that new network and help also be consulted on specific schemes that we're doing. And on the right-hand side, that is the sort of new strategic plan that we will hopefully have by sort of late summer, early autumn next year. And then in particular, I know the committee were just keen to look at a sort of a specific scheme. So from that kind of big picture down to a very specific scheme to just talk you through sort of how it works on the ground. So this is in Doncaster. It leads away from the city centre on South Parade and then through to Bennetthorpe. And these are, I guess, the different stage processes you go through. I'm sure you'll be familiar with these from other sort of transport schemes. So this was under the Transforming Cities Fund back in March 2020, at which point it has quite a broad objective. Then we worked, Doncaster and we worked together on the outline business case, which sets out that we wanted some really high quality, quite innovative, very segregated walking and cycling infrastructure, new crossings. Then Doncaster would lead on that community consultation to make sure it fits with what people want. Then we moved to the full business case stage, so we can see there the full value of the project at about 1.26 million, and the benefit cost ratio, and for this it was £3, it was 3.51, so for every pound you get in, you get £3.51 of different types of benefits. You can see a bit of the before and after, so constructed through 2022 to 2023, and then in terms of the outcomes, what we've described here is sort of two halves of the scheme. The last bit has just finished, but for the first half of the scheme that went in, we saw around a 4,000 cyclists per month uplift, so about a doubling in terms of cycling. And that is interesting because I think some of the comments we often get at the consultation stage might be, there's not very many cyclists here, as an example, why do you want to put the infrastructure in? Actually, once you put the infrastructure in, then you obviously get people using that if you've done all the other things well. And then this is just a very brief overview of the sort of the bigger programme of work, of which that scheme is one. So around 57 schemes, £160 million budget. You can see on the top left there, that comes from a mix of quite a big proportion from Transforming Cities Fund, TCF, a chunk from the City Regional Sustainable Transport Settlement, a smaller amount from the Active Travel Funds, which is directly controlled by Active Travel England, and then a few other funding sources as well. Roughly, as you can see on the right-hand side, roughly divided in proportion to the different local authorities. And then bottom left, we can see we've got 12 schemes completed, 11 in construction, and then a number sort of working their way through those stages of the business case process. We've fully finished and processed and finished all the financial claims for around £43 million of those schemes. A lot more has been spent on the ground, but not yet fully made its way through kind of our processes. And then the final slide, which, sorry, I know not, we can definitely circulate round, not really to go through now in detail, but it's really just, I think you particularly asked just for the update on the schemes that were outlined in the Active Travel Implementation Plan, and I should have said that earlier, but that was the plan that we're currently working to, so it's from 2019, 2020, and it had a sort of set of specific schemes, and this just sets out the specific progress on that, and that might be something, Sarah, we can probably circulate around, because we realised when we finished it that it's a little bit detailed for this, but just to give you a sense, I guess, of the programme. I think that was it, and I know you wanted for us to leave time for questions, Chair, so yes, happy to take any questions.
Jeff, please.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Coincidentally, I attended a public meeting in my own ward in Grimethorpe, St Luke's Church, in Grimethorpe last night, which was very well attended because we've got a massive local problem with off-road bikers, quad bikes, and all those sort of forms of people riding things that they shouldn't be riding, causing accidents and what have you. That's not a peculiar problem just to Grimethorpe, it's the same throughout a lot of rural and urban locations throughout South Yorkshire. And I see this active travel plan as very important to actually address some of the problems that we've got with off-road bikers and quad bikers and things like that, because I think the police need to get involved with the delivery of the active travel scheme. It may actually say, well, we've got a young offender here who's been on bikes, etc., etc. We'll get him to do some work on the Trans-Pennine Trail or wherever, you know what I mean? And that's why I think schemes like this are essential for us to address the balance in terms of the local idiots we've got who are creating mayhem for local people, particularly elderly people. We had people in that room last night who hadn't been out for 6 months because they don't go out. And particularly in the dark nights, because of being intimidated by youngsters on bikes and things like that. So I just wanted to get the thoughts of our experts, shall we say, in terms of involving the police and trying to get rid of this constant problem we've got in all our communities.
Thanks very much. So I think the first thing to say is we often have problems on some of our off-road routes in terms of accessibility. So we have A-frames that try and stop said youngsters on illegal vehicles. And whilst there's good intent behind that, I think the truth is they're going to get through anyway. We know that. So these A-frames, all they really do is they stop the people that need to get access to them. So what we need to, part of the solution, I believe, is sort of removing these barriers so more people can get down there, promoting them, creating a greater pipeline. So these off-road routes are in more regular use. There's more footfall. And I think that in itself will put off antisocial behaviour. In terms of involving the police, we've done some work with Kev Smith, who's particularly supportive, particularly of close pass, and this is perhaps something we need to look more into. Nicola, have you got any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. I think we really value the off-road trails, and I think particularly the Transpennine Trail through Barnsley and actually across all of South Yorkshire, but how we can make that something that's accessible for people and used in the right way. And it is quite a challenge, as Ed said, balancing some of those things. One of the things we want to do is to reinvigorate and work much more closely with the Safe Roads Partnership, which is a really key link in with South Yorkshire Police. And actually there are some really great community groups right across South Yorkshire that are supporting young people as well as adults in, what sometimes is seen as kind of leisure cycling, and therefore why is it active travel, or leisure walks or leisure runs, but actually it is just how you're getting people out to enjoy the outdoors in that safe and responsible manner. But that's a really good point that we'll follow up on that one specifically, actually, now that you've raised it. Thank you.
Christine?
Thank you, Chair. Hi. I'm a cyclist, and I've got an issue in my ward that I just thought I'd run past you. And it's to do with planning. So how much weight can planning give to cycle paths? Because we're getting a supermarket built, and the main entrance is going to be right across the cycle path. Obviously, I haven't started to tackle this yet, but I'm just wondering, when we're looking at these things, do you engage with how planning works? Because, these things are important. If we want to have a continuous safe route, we need to stop big developments cutting them in half and things.
Yeah, Nicola, I'll let you lead on that one.
Yeah, so it's a really good point, and actually Active Travel England have now got a sort of set of statutory powers around planning, and what they are encouraging each of the combined authorities to do is to play a much more active role in terms of linking up active travel and planning. So we actually, and it is sometimes, as you'll know, I'm sure in other areas, slightly a resource point, but actually here and definitely within each of the local authorities should be quite a link between active travel sort of and transport planners and officers and planning to make sure that new developments, whether it's housing developments or commercial developments, actually are not just not preventing but are actively supporting active and sustainable travel. So it'd be interesting. I'm happy to pick that particular one up offline, because it should be the case, and we are now involved in a lot of the planning consultations to be feeding into them, and that's quite a new responsibility, I guess, that we're still working through, but it's definitely something I'm happy to pick up separately as well.
Sinead?
Apologies if this sounds negative, because I used to be a very keen cyclist. The children I taught thought, this is going back to the 80s, they thought that I only rode a bike because that's what poor people do. Whereas now if you explain to them how expensive bikes are, what I actually wanted to ask was about e-scooters and also electric bikes. The ones that we seem to be seeing now, which have got fatter tyres and look almost like little motorbikes, and how we get a more responsible use of those, because they seem to be popular because they're faster than just cycling, and I've had lots of pensioners talking to me about how scary they find that. And if we're going to promote cycling and say this is a good, responsible thing to be doing, what do we do about the ones who are slightly less responsible?
I think the first thing I'd want to say is legal e-bikes that are restricted to the EU standard 25 kilometres an hour, 15.5 mile an hour. I'm all for them. I think they, talk about how alienating the middle-aged man on his racing bike, his carbon fibre racing bike can be these days. I've seen some really anti-cyclist but anti-bike people have a go on a modern e-bike and they absolutely love it. In some ways we've already got a viable alternative to the car. You can cover vast amounts of distance. They're incredibly efficient, even when compared to the most efficient electric car. So I really believe in e-bikes and the doors and opportunities that they can open. I haven't answered your question in terms of how do we police the illegal ones. I like to think that there's a lot of young people that work incredibly hard jobs, delivery riders. They're probably trying to make life slightly easier for themselves. I like to think we could one day get to a point where we're working with their employers, partner them up with bike brands that produce legal bikes that they can ride safely. I've got a big dream and a big vision that we can get to somewhere like that, but yeah. These answers aren't easy, yeah.
And I think particularly on e-scooters, so there are a number of places in the country which are part of a e-scooter trial at the moment. We're not one of those places. I mean, I guess in the future that we might be. I mean, I think until that point, obviously it's not something that we're going to be exploring, but it is something probably that will be coming down the track depending on how those trials go, and it is something we're going to need a response for. It's a very I was a director at Cycling UK for a while, and we spent a lot of policy time on this, and it's a real challenge on e-scooters because they are a form of micromobility which, if they are replacing car journeys, is really great. The research is quite mixed on whether they actually replace car journeys or if they replace walking journeys instead. They can feel very threatening in a pedestrian environment, so I think it's something we'd have to think carefully about. However, if they become legal across the UK, obviously we'll have to be thinking how we include them in our planning. But yeah, don't have a ready answer for that one right now.
Hannah?
Thanks, Claire. Thank you both. Couldn't agree more, Ed, with your response on e-bikes. I mean, first of all, the answer to pedestrians, elderly people being intimidated by people on any sort of bike, because I suspect, Ed, you can cycle a bike faster than anyone can talk on an e-bike, is active travel lanes, cycle lanes that give safe spaces for people who are cycling, wheeling, e-biking, whatever. But for me, they're an enabler. Just to give an example of a friend who was, she'd say herself was very overweight, quite inactive. She got herself an e-bike primarily because her husband liked to take the kids out cycling, and she felt left behind, but she simply couldn't keep up. So she got an e-bike, which was great, and she's now doing triathlons.
Yeah.
So the enablement of that, I've joked about it with my husband. He's a cyclist. We used to mountain bike together. I couldn't keep up then. I certainly couldn't keep up now. If I ever wanted to go out cycling with him, the only hope I would have of being anywhere near his back wheel would be to get an e-bike. So they're definitely enabler. That was just a response to Shauna's really. My question is around how are you finding getting engagement from local authorities? So I do think that active travel is something that is a public appetite for a whole variety of reasons, whether it's around access to public transport, which we know is pretty terrible, whether it's around the price of fuel at the moment, or people just trying to fit a little bit of physical activity into an already busy day. I do think that's something that there is public appetite for. What I've seen as a councillor in Barnsley is that it is very much not a priority for the local authority, that it's hard to deliver, it's an afterthought, it's at the bottom of a great big pile of things that they can't really afford to do in the current climate. And so I absolutely love the way you're going with that. I'm just wondering how you're finding that sort of engagement with the local authorities.
Yeah, so far I think it's been quite positive. And as mentioned, I've only been in this role since February, so I can't speak of years gone by necessarily, but all the meetings, all the conversations I've had with the leaders and execs have been very positive, and I know it's probably fair to say there's more political will for active travel than before. I think Mayor Oliver is right behind it.
I know he's right behind that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's he sees it as a big part of his health and his manifesto, which is obviously big on. In terms of, you feel like it's sometimes perceived as an afterthought. This is the way I see it. I mean, we're all working very hard right now to improve public transport, buses, trams, trains, and so on. People can't walk there, people can't ride the bike there. It's all got to be part and parcel, yeah. So.
Yeah, and I'd really add to that I think we've had a really positive, and particularly since I started in August, very positive engagement across the local authorities. I think one of the things we want to do as part of this new strategic plan is to say there isn't a cookie cutter approach across the 4 authorities. So I've previously had lots of national jobs, and Scotland is very different to Cornwall, and you need to acknowledge that when you're doing national projects, and it's just the same in South Yorkshire. And so I think it's about saying where are local authorities now in their schemes, their deliveries, their networks. We want to support each of them to build the right network for them, and that might look a bit different in Barnsley as it does into central Sheffield, but we want the same set of principles across them and the same high standards across them. And I think what's really key, and what I feel has probably been missing over the last couple of years, and really is our job at Simca to do, is what is that overarching kind of strategic communications narrative that says why this is good, why this is not just for men in lycra, but actually it's for the mum who's dropping their toddler off at nursery and then wanting to pop to the co-op, and they want somewhere safe to be able to cross the road to do that. It's a sort of a different narrative, and I think perhaps we haven't always had that here, and so I'm hoping that we're able to do that, working with communities, which then also helps politicians and officers to say, actually, there are people behind it, because active travel is something where there can be quite a vocal minority against it, but actually the research is quite clear that is a minority against it. Actually, the majority are either for it or certainly not opposed to it, perhaps not such a strong voice. So it's, how we make it, I guess, a more community effort.
Thank you. It's something that I see a huge market for in my ward, so I represent Penistone in Barnsley.
Yeah.
And it's there could be a huge uptake of sort of active travel there for a whole variety of reasons. And while we do have the Transpennine Trail, so getting from my house, for example, to the Transpennine Trail means going down a massive hill, over a main road, and back up another massive hill, which is not so easy. And while it's not city centre or even town centre, every single village is built around a main road, which is absolutely lined with parked cars, because we are somewhere where people can afford to have cars. And so in terms of your visibility, and it's certainly not somewhere that I would like to cycle or would like my kids to cycle. And so I think there's definitely a market there for that.
Great, that's great.
I agree. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I think it's a game changer, electric bikes, but one of the things is integration, and obviously the trams here. One of the things is people quite often with their journeys want to go from A to B to C to D, and travelling as an anorak I am around Europe last year, or interrailing but using different transport modes. One of the things that I noticed in many European cities was the fact that you could hire an electric bike, you could walk to an electric bike, hire the electric bike, then take it to the tram, get on the tram, and other people were getting on, were taking their bikes to the tram, then finish off their journey with the cycle. I mean, how's that working? Because that's just within this authority that we need to be looking at how we're going to integrate all this. And how are you working for this?
I'm just mindful that we need to think slow and build fast sometimes. Worst case scenario is we've kind of rush into a cycle hire scheme, for example, and it doesn't work out, and we sort of we'll take a step backwards and rather sort of take our time. I think of a logical, pragmatic plan that again this is co-designed in collaboration with the communities. We need to understand deeply what people want. Is this going to be effective? I for one have spent a lot of time in Europe myself, and I've seen it out there. Every time I go down to London to do some business, it's a train, it's a hire bike, and it all works very, very well. We've just got to make sure that if we do take such a leap of faith, it's well educated.
I think Sinead had a question.
I was just going to say that if you're looking for a poster boy for all this, Councillor Peter Price in Sheffield, who's nearly 86, who does at least 70 miles a week on his bike, and he's just recently gone on to electric bike because he's older now, and you really ought to get him out there as your champion.
Great, yeah. How's he looking for his age?
Bloody marvellous.
Who would have thought it? Active travel. Okay, thanks.
Right, thank you for that, because I understand how time's pressing on. Thank you, and I hope you'll come back to us again with projects, because one of the things I did notice is that you had 23 projects seemingly in the pipeline, but you said there were going to be 57 in total, which is a shortfall of 34, if my maths is correct. Like to see how they're developing at sometime in the future, either in a formal meeting or via a briefing session that we have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thanks.
Moving on to the next item on the agenda. Sorry for a bit late, Pat. Tram mobilisation.
Thank you, Chair. I will try and get the slides in front of you shortly. I think that is here. They were circulated as part of the pack, so I will not dwell on them too long, but I think it's worth actually illustrating a couple of points in the background. So thank you for inviting me today to give an update on the tram mobilisation update and the transfer of the tram into an arm's length wholly owned subsidiary for the MCA. So just a quick recap on the previous meeting, because we had a previous update at this meeting, and it's always worth actually kind of going through that briefly to say where we were last time and where we are today. So last time we discussed about how we were staging the new company's transformation process, and it's a little bit small print really. The slides were in the back last time, but first of all we need to go through a recovery phase once the tram has come into public control. Then we need to go through a transition phase, and then we enter into a growth phase. So it's really important that we have an embedment phase following the transition, noting that the organisation has been under Stagecoach's control for the past 27 years by the time we do the transfer. So then we have the year one, we went through the swim lanes, almost the work streams and the deliverables and the key work streams within the mobilisation programme, and we also had a brief update on the milestones last time. So this time I want to discuss a couple of key elements of the progress that we've made in the transfer and the mobilisation. So with this company coming in under an arm's length operating organisation for the MCA, it means that we need to establish new governance arrangements where Stagecoach are no longer the owning group. So we become a semi-owning group of that tram organisation, and that needs to be governed with an appropriate oversight structure. So we've now shaped a proposed board structure, or have an initial board structure for the new operating organisation, which is now known as SIFTL, South Yorkshire Future Trams Limited. So that will be comprising 3 directors on the MCA side, so that to give the operating organisation oversight, because there are a number of critical areas that we need to focus on, including ongoing sustainability and ongoing improvements, and there's also a major asset renewal programme happening in the background. There will be 3 directors from the operating organisation that will be appointed, because they know how their operating organisation really works, their people, the processes, the maintenance, etc. And that will then be chaired by a non-exec MCA director as the chair. So that is the structure under which the new organisation will be governed. And the tools that the board will have at its disposal is a business planning tool as well as an operating agreement. So the operator will still be held to account for running services, frequency of services, etc. And that will be captured essentially in a legal agreement between the MCA and the new limited company under which the operations are taking place. But there is also a need for continuous improvement in the organisation, and that will be governed through a business planning process. So we've established a first year business plan which will be taken to as part of the MCA approvals for budgets as well. On the 9th of January there's a budget paper going to the MCA for the 2024-25 budget, and that is supported by activities and deliverables of the first year business plan for the tram.
Question on it. Is this board, is this in place now, or when's it anticipated to be in place?
It cannot formally be established until the operating organisation is really active, the new operating organisation. We are doing a shadow board format, because at the moment the operating organisation is under Stagecoach management. So it's owned by Stagecoach. So although we have established an operating company via Companies House, we can do a shadow board form, and we're intending on doing that. Well, we've actually set the first meeting for a shadow board in the run up to the transfer date on the 22nd of March 2024. Thank you. So just to give you an overview of the planning framework, quite classic really. We need to have an overarching vision and a mission which needs to be aligned with our wider transport vision, which we are refining and developing. But we need to set strategic priorities and objectives for that board, and that needs to be supported by strategic plans and initiatives which will then be captured within those business plans and the delivery plans. So we have 4 focus areas for the operating organisation, which is disciplined operations, customer, people and organisation, and stakeholder relations. And that will then be broken out in an initial 100-day transition plan, because we have to recognise that we are taking on systems in that the owner group at the moment are not, will no longer be providing from day one of our new co-operating organisation. So for example, HR systems are centrally supplied by Stagecoach. We will put those HR systems in place to continue have a seamless organisation, a seamless transition. That means that people need to be trained, need to be getting accustomed to new processes, new systems, and there will be a transition and an embedment period in those first 100 days. And then also we need to look at the business transformation plan so that we can set up the company for success for ongoing sustainability, especially bringing more demand on, but also renewing the asset, which is now almost 30 years old. So there's a significant program of asset renewal of £100 million and beyond happening. Then for the longer term, we also need to think about the strategic horizon and the opportunities that, for example, the restoring railway schemes in the region are bringing to the tram operations going forwards. So that is in a nutshell. I can break it a little bit more, but you've seen the slides, but I think that is probably sufficient for the commentary right now. So I would welcome very much any questions you may have.
Any questions for anybody? Chrissy?
Yeah, I did have a question. I can't find it now. It was about the renewal of the tracks, because I live in an area with trams and there's always potholes all the way along there, and I know that it's an ongoing job. And I think a few months ago I did send an email to the Mayoral Authority about how you're going to deal with this when it's taken over, to make sure there's ongoing maintenance and it's kept up to date, because I think that's what residents in my area are very worried. I mean, they think it's great that it's becoming under, you know, local mayoral authority or control, but they are worried about the roadworks and the potholes. So I just wanted some confirmation of how that will be looked at.
Thank you, Councillor. So there are 2 distinct activities. There's an ongoing maintenance needed, road maintenance, track maintenance, and the operating organisation is accountable for the maintenance, or the ongoing maintenance of the assets of the tram system. Where we have embedded rail, embedded in the roads, of course there's an element of responsibility of maintenance of the road that is designated to the tram and is embedded, and then an element of the road that is part of local highways maintenance regime. Then we have a big renewal activity where we say there are assets that are now no longer economically viable, and that replaces major components. So in the forward planning, the operating organisation, SIFTL, under arm's length, will continue to be accountable for the ongoing maintenance, and there should be maintenance budgets are associated with that. Renewal is a bit further. It stretches further because, for example, the power stations need to be, the power transformers need to be upgraded. That is a more a replacement activity. So there's an ongoing maintenance need, and there's an ongoing a renewal, proper renewal need. if there are particular areas where, for example, the pothole situation, we need to identify really jointly with the highways, local highways, how we can make sure that that maintenance is being picked up and is improved. So that is something I can take away and investigate as well.
Thank you.
How do you find your work? Because I've just had a punishing hour this morning on highways with Amy, and how do you find, because how close to the tracks is it your responsibility, the tram provider, and how close, like the potholes that will mean that somebody who may be cycling to go across the road, I'm being polite about the cyclist rather than motorist, and then they hit the pothole and then fall onto the tram tracks. I mean, whose responsibility is that, and for some of the repairs and maintenance of the roads, and how close?
I have an exact number somewhere on my system because that is clearly defined. So where we have embedded rail, we have an accountability as an asset owner, and the operator have an accountability for the maintenance, but specific measures are defined. So what I'll do during the next section, I'll look it up and let you know the exact number. Yeah.
Do we? I haven't got anybody else for questions because we had your briefing relatively recently. So thank you very much. If that's it, thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
And obviously further updates as necessary for slippage, etc. And any briefings. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda, I'd like to welcome Mayor Oliver Coppard. Welcome to the meeting. Sorry we're slightly behind schedule. And would you like to just give us a brief update on what you've been up to in the last since our last meeting?
Can indeed. Thank you. Are we a bit thin on the ground, or have I made that up? We are. Yeah, we are. Okay. Thank you. It's nice to be here again. I last spoke to you, I think, on the 21st of September. Have I got that right? And at that meeting, agreed to offer some opportunities to meet, and since then I've met with the chair, which was great. And thank you again for coming in to see us. Other things that we've been up to since that date include more than 20 public bus meetings as part of our Mayor's Fair funding deal for South Yorkshire's bus campaign. They have happened across the region. Grateful to some of the councillors on the committee for coming and joining in those meetings, not least Councillor Bacon. Thank you for being there. Attended Conservative Party conference, Labour Party conference, and the COP28 summit as part of the City Region Leaders Delegation Local Action Summit. The first time that's happened. It was good to be there as part of COP28's assorted global mayors. Spoke at 25 events across the conference season, big and small. Spoke at Sheffield Synagogue on the 11th of October and the Medina Mosque on the 13th of October following the Hamas terrorist attack, and again at the inaugural Northern Jewish Labour Movement Conference in Manchester on the 22nd of October. Led a trade delegation to St Louis, Missouri and Washington DC from the 14th to the 20th of September, speaking chiefly about advanced manufacturing and South Yorkshire's global leadership in that space, again to a global audience of mayors, city leaders and political leaders from across the world. Bilateral meetings with Transport Secretary, Rail Minister and Bus Minister, all related to the Government's Network North announcements, and a visit to the region by the Rail Minister, Hugh Merriman, which was welcome, and a good opportunity to show him the opportunity that exists, particularly around things like tram renewal and extension. That happened on the 9th of November. We had a ministerial roundtable on major condition strategy with Will Quince, who was then Health Minister, but sadly no longer is Health Minister. Gave evidence to the Business and Trade Select Committee on the 21st of November on investment zones alongside Ben Bradley from East Midlands. Launched South Yorkshire Citizens Assembly on the 28th of October and have since concluded the Citizens Assembly. Launched the new Business Advisory Board to replace the LEP. Launched the Year of Active Travel. Joined the Mayor's response to end ticket office closures, and I'm pleased to say we were successful in that campaign to keep ticket office closures open, and I think we did play an important role in that decision. I'm grateful again to the government for listening to passengers, although frankly I don't think we should have ended up in that position. I've given the keynote address at the South Yorkshire International Trade Conference, the South Yorkshire Women in Business Conference, the Yorkshire Asian Business Roundtable, the ARC Summit, the launch of Doncaster's Green Construction Skills Academy, and a Business in the Community Summit. Those meetings are in addition to the regular meetings and commitments that I have, including all internal MCA board meetings, monthly call Coppard, on Radio Sheffield, bi-monthly meetings of the Transport for the North Board, where I have been this morning, Rail North Committee, Yorkshire Leaders Board and Enhanced Partnership Board, and monthly meetings of the N10 group of Metro Mayors. That is in addition to work on Police and Crime Commissioner transfer, growth and delivering the investment zone, assembling our Mayor's Economic Advisory Council, our work to plant 1.4 million trees, work on franchising. Pardon? All about 1.4. Yeah. One for every person who lives here. You'll have your own. I'll come plant yours personally, shan't and DSA working to reopen the airport, and on the work to make sure that we can successfully bring the Supertram back under public control in March of next year. So it has been a busy few months, hence why I look exhausted.
We had comments to see, you know, have you been to COP28, how much of a tan you have, and you don't appear to have any.
Sadly, no tan. It was not that kind of trip.
Jeff first, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Throughout your mayoralty, Oliver, you've obviously highlighted the growing north-south divide across the country, and rightly so. That's got to be one of your prime objectives, to address that. And I thank you for the work you've done so far in that regard. The problem, as I now see, is we've not just got a north-south divide, we've got a west-south divide. We've got West Yorkshire, who are getting masses of brass for their new tram system. They're getting masses of brass to enhance their bus service provision. We aren't getting a cracker, basically, that West Yorkshire's getting. So, for me, that is a major area that we need to address also. I'd just like your views on that, and why is it that we're being disadvantaged for the benefit of places like West Yorkshire, which is also in the north of England like us?
Absolutely. I think it's a really important question, actually, and one that I think we could spend a huge amount of time delving into. I don't think we have the time, but because for me, the idea of levelling up was not just, and I'm a huge supporter of the idea of levelling up, of course I am. I have my questions about the success or otherwise of the policies that are supposed to level up our country, but I think the idea is the right one. But levelling up can't just mean a broad-based approach to some line in the middle of this country, and above that line we are the north, and below that line it is the south, and as long as the two are relatively equal, it's success. I don't think that is right. It should be absolutely that we are levelling up all of our communities, as much as that is about our relative success or otherwise in funding bids versus West Yorkshire, Greater Manchester. It's also about how we level up in our own community. So how are we making sure that all parts of our growth plan reach Doncaster, Barnsley, Rotherham and all of Sheffield? So it's absolutely about all of that. I think there's a number of challenges which coincide that when it comes to those outcomes that you've already mentioned, one of which is the way in which devolution has happened across this country. It's been a piecemeal approach to devolution. So, for instance, Greater Manchester have had a mayor for longer than we have had, and therefore they've had more success on things like bus franchising because they've had a mayor for 7 years, and therefore been able to do a bit more in that space. And the devolution settlement more broadly in Manchester through things like AGMA, which you may remember, the Association of Greater Manchester Authorities, has been more established for longer. So we are, to a certain extent, playing catch-up against Greater Manchester and to a certain extent West Yorkshire. But I do think that we are actually kind of going further and faster now than those places in lots of spaces and places. For instance, we were the first place in the country to become an investment zone, beating Liverpool City region, Greater Manchester and West Yorkshire to the punch, and I think that was a good thing. And there are a couple of other things that are happening behind the scenes which are indicative of that kind of approach. But I am making the case, indeed I was at Transport for the North this morning, making the case that it is not okay for the North just be treated as one amorphous place, and as long as they're putting funding somewhere in the North, that's okay. South Yorkshire wants its fair share of that funding. I wrote to the Prime Minister on the back of, or just before the autumn statement about the devolution, the level for devolution settlements, because one of the things we haven't been given in that agreement is single pot settlement, so the ability to get all of that money essentially kind of wrapped into one big bucket that we can use for various things, and business rate retention. And without the business rate retention in particular that Manchester will have, West Midlands will have, we're not able then to actually use that funding in a more flexible way or have the revenue to be able to support certain projects and programmes. So I am fighting that corner. I think there's a bunch of reasons why it's the case. Also the Treasury Green Book is part of that challenge in the way that investments are rated and measured. They are done on an economic measure related to the Green Book in the Treasury, and if it provides more economic uplift, then you're more likely to get the project or plan approved. And South Yorkshire, because of the poor state of our economy right now, doesn't do quite so well in those sorts of measures. And so there's all sorts of reasons wrapped up as to why that is the case.
Can I just very quickly come back, Chair? If I was a cynical politician, which I am, Oliver, I would say, to some extent, the current government are wanting to break the unity of the Northern Mayors.
Yeah. The
unity of the North, because I think the Northern Mayors have done very well in all singing off the same song sheet for a long period of time. And by doing this, playing one Northern authority off against the other, they're hoping to break the unity of the Northern Mayors. And I'd like your comments on that, please.
I think whether I like it or not, you like it or not, we like it or not, there is always going to be an element of politics at play in the decisions that this government are making about funding for certain communities and parts of the country. And I think we've seen that quite egregiously. You heard the comments from Rishi Sunak about the fact that he was changing the funding formulas and was very proud of it when he was running into the leadership election. He was changing the funding formulas in order to shovel money into places like Tunbridge Wells and take money away from the north, and he made that statement himself. I'm not playing politics with that, that was his statement. I think that's always been the case. They will do well to break the unity of the mayors because we, I think, are a strong group, working very closely together and well. The ticket office closures, I think, was an example of how we have done some of that. We, of course, disagree on some of these things, and we, of course, absolutely want to fight our own corner for our own regions. But I was with Andy Burnham this morning at Transport for the North, very happy to support Andy, in fact, keen to support Andy on his campaign around Avanti. Avanti is cancelling 1 in 4 trains going up to Greater Manchester and to London from Manchester. That is not okay, partly because it has an impact on our services on the East Coast Main Line. People come over to South Yorkshire in order to get trains down to London because they can't access them from Manchester. So we are all connected. We are essentially one community in lots of ways, and I'm keen to work with the mayors in order to state our case, fight our corner, and the government, I don't think, are going to break that relationship. And I would like to actually say on that as well, Andy Street has been a real ally in that as well, actually. So Andy Street, the mayor of the West Midlands, has been an ally in a lot of that work. We've worked with him on a couple of projects, not least saving Working Win, which he works with us on closely, and I'm a big fan of Andy Street doing that with us.
Thank you very much for that. I'll take Hannah, then Sinead, and then Josh.
First of all, I deeply depend if you went to the Conservative conferences. Not the
I didn't get an invite.
Conference.
If you want to invite me next year, I'll come.
You know what, Oliver? I actually sit. This is a penance I'm paying for something. I don't know what. I actually sit on the Liberal Democrats Federal Conference Committee, and we have been talking about how what our members would like is more keynote speeches. So, oh dear.
In a way that will delight my office, I am happy to commit to coming to Lib Dem conference next year. I'm committing here in front of you all to come to okay, good point.
It's in the same place it always is. It's on the south coast. It's Brighton next year.
Okay, I will take the penance of going to Brighton in order to come and speak if you invite me.
Not as nice as Bournemouth, I understand. Marvellous, lovely, that's great. To some extent, you answered my question actually around what is your relationship currently with the other mayors, because it does often feel the same to me, Jeff. Like South Yorkshire's not getting as good a deal. And we're not trying to play catch up with West Yorkshire. They've had the mayor for 2 years less than us.
Yeah.
I would remind Jeff that I believe there was a better devolution offer on the table back in the day, and because of some low-level squabbling between the South Yorkshire council leaders, that one got shelved, and we ended up with a less good one. So, have you had any? Are you getting any sort of good advice from the other mayors? And I don't just mean the other sort of northern Labour mayors. I mean people like Andy Street and the Tees Valley guy whose name escapes me.
Ben Hatch.
on how to improve the pot that we're getting, on how to improve how we're allowed to use that pot, and also on the bids as well, because we've not done well recently in the recent round of transport bids. Are they sort of helpful in giving you advice on how to improve our sort of, or is it a dark art?
Well, let me just sort of question the question a little bit, because I think that the point I'm trying to make around devolution and the maturity of devolution is not just the time you've had a mayor. That's not, I think, the only measure of whether or not devolution is mature or otherwise. I think West Yorkshire have had arguably closer relationships as a group of local authorities. And indeed, right, look, I think everybody would accept that in South Yorkshire we have not taken full advantage of some of those opportunities to advance devolution, and I think that is probably a fair reflection of the position we're in right now. I think that, though, the story that I think is also fair to tell is that we are now making great strides. Steve Houghton himself said to me that relationships in South Yorkshire are better than they've been for 20 years, and I take huge pride in that, because I think it's an incredibly important foundation on which to build the future. If you look at some of the things that we've got as a result of devolution recently, not least, as I say, the investment zone, which is the kind of thing I would hang my hat on, actually, is to say where we've been able to put the work in, and clearly you will understand that these things take time to turn around, and where we've had the opportunity to then turn things around, we have then had success. And I have great confidence actually in the way that we're working now to be more successful going forward. So with all due respect to the other mayors who I like and respect deeply, including Andy Street, I don't think I need any kind of lessons from other mayors in how to do some of that work, because we are getting on and doing it already, and increasingly being successful in the relationships that we have with government. I mentioned some of the meetings that we've had and the people we've been able to bring here, and some of the kind of results that will pay off will inevitably take years to, you know what it's like with investing in public transport, not least kind of hard infrastructure, trains, or light rail, etc. It takes years to see those things pay off. We were not successful in things like our BSIP funding bid, £434 million that we didn't get from the government. I wish I could tell you more about why we didn't get that money. Sadly, I didn't get a huge amount of information back from the government when we asked for that, and I think you've probably seen the letter that we did have. If not, we can share it with you. It is, I think, not okay that we put 18 months into a bid and yet they give us a one-page, two-page letter in return and no money. And so, whether I like it or not, the system as it currently operates pits and makes mayors compete with each other. And quite honestly, I just don't think that's the way to level up a country or to create a more equal opportunity for everybody that lives here. It should be based on need, in my view, and we shouldn't be competing with each other for funding. People in West Yorkshire deserve better buses, and to a certain extent, people in West Yorkshire, in Wakefield, travel into South Yorkshire as a result of public transport, equally kind of Leeds and Sheffield, etc., etc. So we shouldn't be competing with our friends and neighbours anywhere in the north, over in Greater Manchester. We should be able to say what the need looks like and then have a sensible and grown-up conversation. Sadly, the politics does seem to get in the way. I think we're increasingly trying to be better at playing the politics, and I hope we're more successful, but I just wish we didn't have to engage in that sort of system in order to get funding and investment for South Yorkshire.
Yeah, thanks. That's really positive. If I could just one, because we did have a briefing on bus franchising fairly recently. It hasn't been on our agenda today. Could you just give us a super quick update on how you think that process is going?
Yeah,
with assessments and things?
Well, I would argue so. This is one of those areas which I would point out and say this is actually accelerated since I became mayor. I'm very proud of kind of the way we've approached that problem. Dan, one of his last acts was to kind of start that process, and we've then taken the ball and run with it quite quickly. So we've been able to go through the stages that we're up to the stage we're at now quicker than I think anybody else, albeit starting later than other people, so I appreciate the frustration. We are, I think, close to being able to kind of agree a concrete set of numbers that we understand to be correct about what franchising would offer versus the enhanced partnership model that we currently have. Now, that's the kind of stage that you have before you go to an audit. You then have to have an external review of that set of numbers who have to tell you that you've done your sums correctly, essentially, and it's not a guarantee that we will get a clean bill of health for that. There are all sorts of reasons why we could have done our numbers correctly, but they could still take issue with some of that. So we will pass those numbers over to the auditor at some point, I hope next year, and then once we've got a clean, presuming we get a clean bill of health, we will then be able to go to the public and ask them to tell us what they want from that, if they do indeed want franchising. And I've got I'm optimistic if that is the case that we would get support from the community, albeit I recognise that in places like West Yorkshire they are getting pushback from bus companies who seemingly don't want it to happen, despite the fact telling us that they're making very little profit anywhere on buses, but they're very keen not to see any change. So anyway.
No one likes to lose control, do they? Do you have any kind of timescale, do you think, on when that might go to the auditor and then go out to the public?
I probably don't want to commit to one, if only because I don't want to be telling you incorrect information. I think early next year I would like to be able to tell you more. So if at the next meeting, if you ask me some
we
similar
look forward
questions.
to that at the next meeting.
Pardon?
We look forward to that at the next
Yes,
meeting then.
yes, indeed.
Sinead?
Thank you. Obviously, with your strong connections with Andy Street, please can you tell him it's about time John Lewis pulled their finger out and came back to Sheffield.
They lost theirs, didn't they? They've lost theirs, actually.
I know.
Birmingham have lost theirs, which I think must have been a bit of a kick in the teeth for Andy Street. Really.
No wonder he left.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you on a South Yorkshire thing about your proposed taking in of the police function into your empire. There we go. I'll use that word. I used entourage just now. I'm still looking for the right word.
Not the word I would use. Let me just be absolutely crystal clear.
I didn't say evil. I wanted to ask various questions, and I'll ask all of them. One was about obviously having somebody who will do the day-to-day PCC function for you, and whether they would be a deputy mayor or what you would anticipate that role holding, and how you plan to recruit them. And then I was going to say that at the moment the PCC is an autonomous role, and that person would be reporting to you. So how much flexibility would that person have in terms of doing the role in the way that it's done at the moment compared with working with you?
Yeah.
What would your relationship be with the chief constable? And what sort of, I'll use the word manifesto or proposals do you have for the way you would like to see yourself working with the police as opposed to the way it's done at the moment?
Okay, I should probably preface my comments, and Chair, would you stop me if I'm waffling too long, because I'm conscious I'm giving some long answers, so I'm happy to engage in the conversation as long as you allow. I should preface my comments by saying that it's not confirmed yet, so whilst we are kind of nearly, very, very nearly there, I don't want to kind of, if only for superstitious reasons, don't want to kind of say that it's... Well, so, no, like, but I've absolutely. I mean, I'm happy to engage in a conversation offline with you as well, because it's an important conversation. I'm hoping we're very, very nearly there. In terms of, so I have, which is my way of leading into saying, we haven't confirmed anything really about kind of how that process will move to the next stage, because quite honestly, we've been so engaged in kind of making this bit work. I don't think we've kind of got to that next stage of working out how to do the deputy and etc. But I can offer you some initial thoughts, as long as you take them in that spirit, please. I'm conscious that in other parts of the country, and they are the models that I look to, in West Yorkshire, in Greater Manchester, what they've tried to do absolutely is bring in somebody who is of sufficient stature and who brings a certain kind of robustness to the role, and I think that is a model that I would be keen to follow. I think there is the opportunity to offer, and I think we should offer that up as an open recruitment process, albeit there will, I'm sure, be conversations with individual people who I may know or think might be relevant or right for the role, in order to kind of advise them that this is an opportunity that might be good for them. But an open recruitment process would seem like a good idea to me. So I think that would work well. In terms of their how autonomous they may be, I think I would see that as absolutely a team effort. The buck would always stop with me. I would be the Police and Crime Commissioner if I should be successful in that election. I would those powers would be vested in me as the mayor, as opposed to in the MCA. So it would rest with me, and the buck would stop with me. So as much as I would want to work closely with that person, and they should absolutely, if we get the right person, have a clear-eyed view of what they want to try and achieve in that role, ultimately I would be the person responsible, and I think that is absolutely right. That's how it works in Manchester. It's how it works in Leeds, and we, I think, would follow that same model. And in terms of that relationship with the Chief Constable, indeed with the senior police members of the police force and the Home Office, etc., and Her Majesty's Inspectorate, all of those organisations and indeed people I would want to have personal relationships with. I would like to think as a critical friend, absolutely somebody that could work closely in order to help set priorities and help keep them focused on those priorities, but indeed was supportive indeed of the police. I think the way in which South Yorkshire Police have improved, and I know you played a role in that, has been marked and significant and very, very welcome, and I think we want to build on and maintain that success going forward. And it strikes me that the way that Alan has done that job has absolutely to be that critical friend of the police and work closely with them, and I think I would want to maintain that type of relationship. You have to be able to call them out if the police are not doing the right thing for our communities, but equally I am there to support them when they are doing the right thing. And in lots of instances these days, South Yorkshire Police are indeed doing the right thing, and I'm pleased that we are now able to have a outstanding police force in South Yorkshire, and long may that continue. They do. These other bloody mayors keep on stealing.
Thank you for that, Josh. Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Oliver. Yeah, no, I was only too glad to go to one of your 20 public bus meetings. You've just said you're better at playing politics. I just wonder if that was the objective with the bus meetings. That's the first question. The second question I'll move on to.
Sorry. Did you say I said I was better at playing politics?
Yeah, that's what it came across as. Yeah, that you were better at sort of playing politics, and I just wonder if that was the objective of some of the bus meetings. I'll move on to the city region sustainable transport settlement. You know, this fund, for example, it could be used to improve places like the Todwick roundabout, making it better for buses, pedestrians, and cyclists. But isn't the danger that places like Todwick and Aston will again get nothing from the South Yorkshire Mayoral Combined Authority with CRSTS because it's going onto Sheffield City projects?
So I will engage in good faith and say that the point of the bus meetings, as I think you saw when you were there, was to try and help people understand why we are in the position we're in when it comes to the buses. And buses in South Yorkshire are not fit for purpose. Buses in South Yorkshire are not good enough, and I think most people, when I've been around our community, are refreshed to hear a senior politician say what they feel every day, which is that buses simply don't work well enough. I want people to understand, A, why we're in the position that we're in, and B, to understand what we're doing about it in South Yorkshire in order to make things better. I would strongly argue that the reason that we're in the position that we're in is because of 35 years of privatisation, a system that was brought in under Margaret Thatcher, the deregulation and privatisation of our buses. You are too young to remember, that's not meant in a patronising way, lucky you, but I remember 2p buses and buses as far as the eye can see, and I think most of the members of the committee would remember that as well, Hannah with possible exception. But buses were brilliant, and then they were deregulated, and that wrecked the system. Now, it is, I think, a shame that the Labour government during 97-2010 didn't deal with that problem, but equally, since 2010, we have seen a steep decline in the amount of funding available to places like South Yorkshire, and as a result, bus services have got worse. We've lost 40% of our mileage over the last 10 years alone. Over the last few months, couple of years, since COVID in particular, we've seen a steep decline in patronage, 20% fewer people getting the bus than used to get the bus. I think it's important people know that, and I think it is right that as Mayor I go out and have that conversation with our communities and talk to them about what it is that we're doing in order to improve services for people, not least going through the franchising assessment process quicker than anyone else. Now look, my job is as a politician to do politics, and I am happy to go out, and I'm happy indeed, was happy to take, if you'd have wanted to ask more questions at that meeting, you happily could have done. And I would have happily done that, and I would have actually been grateful for some of our MPs coming to those meetings, not least some of our Conservative MPs coming to those meetings. And yeah, Miriam was there. She had to leave unfortunately halfway through, but no, she was there, and I was grateful she was there, and I've had some councillors there as well from all parties, and that's been good. But I am happy to do that. It's a public meeting, and absolutely that includes councillors and indeed MPs. So I think it was the right thing to do. Indeed, I think it is the right thing to do. On CRSTS. CRSTS is not my scheme. CRSTS is a set of money that the government, the Conservative government of which you are, a party member, have decided that CRSTS is the best way to give us funding, and then we work with the government to decide where the investment goes. And the investment goes on the projects that they say are the right projects for our communities as much as we say are the right projects for our communities. And that is a grown-up way to do devolution. I'm not complaining about that process, but I'm simply pointing to the fact that if you are decrying the way in which CRSTS works, to a certain extent you are saying the way in which the government have set that scheme up is not entirely right. Now look, I am absolutely committed to making sure that my community, and indeed your community, every part of our community gets access to better public transport, better transport networks, better roads, better infrastructure. It's really important that that stretches right across our region. Your constituency, your ward, no less than anywhere else, absolutely. But we have to make decisions about where to put that funding, and there isn't enough funding to put it everywhere. I want to make sure that everywhere, including what are really rural parts of our region, get access to those better public transport networks, and none of that is easy. So we're engaged in that conversation with the government right now, and I'm happy to talk to you individually if you want to have a conversation with me about what your community needs, what the kind of transport needs look like. I'm really happy to engage in that conversation because it has to inform what we do going forward. So feel free to contact me. We can sit down and have a coffee and talk about that if that's useful. Happy to do that with any of our councillors or MP colleagues.
Thank you. I've got a couple of final questions of my list. What are your views on hosting or part hosting next Commonwealth Games in South Yorkshire?
So I just read this morning. Forgive me, I'm playing catch up a little bit. Look, I think South Yorkshire should absolutely be at the forefront of any conversation which is about sporting infrastructure and opportunities in this country. We are the foremost city of sport in this country, and I think our record stands in this city in particular. I think South Yorkshire more broadly has a huge amount to offer, not least if you look at some of the talent that exists in South Yorkshire. I think we have a huge amount to shout about. If the government are prepared to invest alongside any sort of bid we might want to put in for those sorts of opportunities, I'm happy to have that conversation with government so that South Yorkshire can do this country proud, because we have some of the very best sporting facilities and talent right across our region, and I'd love to be able to show that off to the world.
Okay, there's another something that I've had flagged up to me. Apparently at one of your bus meetings, there was a company, TM Buses,
TM
but I don't want to go into detail, I don't want to talk about them directly, would not be paid for services they do not run. Have any bus companies had payments withheld for services they have failed to run so far?
I don't know the answer to your question, but I'm happy to find out the information about you if that's okay.
Because I mean, the question, you know,
Yeah.
what I've flagged up was, do we expect bus companies to be honest about the services they do not run, and telling you up front that unless it's flagged up by a resident?
So I do absolutely expect, just for the record, I do absolutely expect bus companies to be upfront and honest with me about the state of their services and what they're doing across our region, and I would be deeply disappointed were I to find out that any bus company were not telling me what I needed to know in order to make decisions about how our bus network operates. My understanding is we've made changes to the way in which we run some of those contracts in order to be able to give us greater clout, including the opportunity to claw back some of the money if bus services aren't run. But can I come back to you with a fuller and indeed more accurate response?
It'd be good, because it's just an interesting one, because you know, there's a few times I've sat for the 51, which I know is dear to your heart, where it's just suddenly disappeared for times.
And I know you might not want to mention it, but I'm happy to say TM Travel have been one of those companies who have performed least well across our region. Yeah, and I do think, and I'm happy to say, right, and I'm happy to say, and I think I'm probably getting support cross-party for this, to say that they aren't performing well enough, and I do need to see them improve their services.
Okay, on that one, and there's just a couple of things. Can I just ask about? Talk about the tram train. You've been planning Sheffield, Chesterfield.
Planning is probably a bit too strong a word.
Is that right?
But thinking about and trying to find ways to kind of think about the broader sweep of how we might connect all sorts of parts of our community right across.
And if for instance, a Beijer transport, are you looking at a park and ride to take traffic off the A57 into Sheffield?
I just don't think we're quite at that stage of any sort of thinking, but I'm really happy. Again, indeed, it's one of those kind of parts of the conversation. I'm really happy to have a conversation with colleagues about kind of what improvements they might want to see at the appropriate time. At this point, it's probably more of a aspiration than it is a confirmed and concrete plan, but I think we are working towards a firmed up plan that would allow us to engage more properly in those conversations.
Okay, thank you very much. I've got time, I think, for the meeting for one final question. Josh.
Thanks, Chair. I just wondered then, Oliver, if you could just clarify how much of the CRS-TS has gone into places like Sheffield in comparison to the rest of South Yorkshire?
So the CRSTS funding round 1, are you asking about, rather than the following rounds?
It could be the following round as well, because I know there was further funding that was committed to South Yorkshire following the cancellation of HS2.
To a certain extent. So forgive me if you know some of this already, but other people may not. So funding round 1 was CRSTS for South Yorkshire was £570 million, and you might notice that whenever the government say, what have you done for South Yorkshire, and I say they've not given us money for buses, they say we gave you £500 million for transport. Now that £570 million is what they're talking about is the CRSTS money, and it is only available for capital infrastructure largely. And so it doesn't help any of us with the revenue support that we need for buses. So from my perspective, slightly misleading comments from the government. The £570 million that we have got, I'm not complaining about £570 million, but per capita was lower than other parts of this country. So again, back to the earlier comments from Councillor Ennis and others, like actually we should have got more money from government for that CRSTS round, but we then used that money and worked with our council colleagues in order to split that up. I believe, and forgive me because I'm not going to commit to this 100%, I think we did split that up on a per capita basis whilst taking out South Yorkshire Mayoral bit of that. So essentially split 5 ways on a per capita. I think that's right in saying. So that's the approach that we took, and we have that conversation with our councils about what they want to fund, and then we have that conversation with government at the same time. So for instance, there is £30 million in that fund for Doncaster for a rail connection to the airport that we put in that bid, and we had that conversation with government at the time. That's what's called a retained scheme, which essentially we can't spend it until or unless government allow us to. I have asked the government to allow me to spend that £30 million on reinstatement of the airport, and have not heard anything back. Doncaster have asked that as well, and the government haven't given us that commitment. So actually the government could help us use that £30 million to do what I think most of South Yorkshire want us to do, which is reopen DSA. I've been working on it tirelessly, as has Doncaster Council, but the government don't allow us to use that money for the things we want to use it for, even though clearly you can't reinstate a train link to a closed airport. So the £30 million will be lost to South Yorkshire if the government don't give us that flexibility. So it's not as easy as just to say, what have we spent or otherwise. It's the conversation and relationship we have with government, and it all works in that way.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Mayor Oliver Coppard. One more question if we got.
It's not a question. I'm going to put a suggestion to the committee, which I'd like Oliver to hear, because it's really to do with the politics of the situation, Chair. We've got 3 Tory MPs in South Yorkshire who have all got the direct ear of the Prime Minister. Oliver Coppard hasn't got the direct ear of the Prime Minister that these 3 MPs have. I would like this committee to write to our 3 Tory MPs and ask them to say what they are doing to support our Mayor in getting a better funding arrangement from the Prime Minister.
I would appreciate that. Can I just make a comment as well about?
I think we need to write to all the MPs, because then we can get the different, then we can see what the compare and contrast.
Can I just?
Okay. I'm up.
Can I just make, because there's one MP in particular that you might want to write to, just to lay out how this system works. Nick Fletcher, the MP for Don Valley, was on one of our calls last week and was bemoaning the fact that there was no Conservative representation on this committee, and I had to remind him that there was Conservative Party representation on this committee, at which point he said that they didn't think there was enough Conservative representation on this committee, and I then had to remind him that it was done proportionally and there was a reason for that. So it may be worth just writing to Nick Fletcher to remind him of how this system works, indeed informing him how this system works, and also maybe reminding him of the existence of Councillor Bacon, because he didn't seem to know that there was Conservative Party representation. Well, I didn't, pick that up in your own time, but, yeah.
Thank you very much. I'll close this meeting at, I'm not sure which clock's right on this, 4:16. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's the meeting.
Have a happy Christmas, everybody. Thank you very much. Oh, fab. Thank you very much.